Hey y'all, Philip here with a quick announcement. We now have a Patreon. Yay! I figure it would just be nice to have the Patreon up earlier rather than later, but I don't have any support tiers or rewards set up yet. One idea I have is to make some exclusive bonus episodes, which would let me cover topics beyond our usual narrative. Another idea is perhaps a patron-exclusive book club. I've been dying to read Mary Renault's Alexander trilogy, or perhaps some good mythology retellings. But these are all preliminary. Actually, if you have any ideas about some fun rewards for patrons, please let me know. You can email me or direct message me on any of the social media platforms. But in the meantime, if you're interested in supporting the podcast monetarily, the link to the Patreon is in the description. Anyway, for now, enjoy the show. Welcome to Alexandria, a Hellenistic World podcast. Episode 5, Demosthenes. It's 341 BCE, and you are sitting in your favorite spot, just a few rows back. You lean back on your arm and press, like always, against Charias for support, his warmth comforting in the tense morning air, the constant jostling of citizens finding their seats behind you. Gods, the jostling today is worse than it's ever been. Normally, the crowd clusters at the center, near the bema, the speaker's stage. But today, you reckon the whole Pnyx, the whole assembly area, is full. Over 10,000 Athenian citizens crammed atop the gentle artificial slope. When you glance behind, you could barely see past the crowd to the Acropolis in the distance, the temple of Athena Parthenos glowing in rosy-fingered dawn. Of course, you know why there's so many people today. It's why you and Charias arrived before sunrise to make sure you got your usual spot, laying your tattered blanket atop his old cushion. It's why you paid attention, unusually, to the purifying rites, to the stench of fresh blood spilling from the pigs, to the curse against anyone wishing to deceive the Athenian people, to the good omens pronouncing favorable weather. You listened carefully to the officials of the Boule, the council of 500 citizens chosen by lot each year. You listened as the chosen councilmen proclaimed the agenda for the day. Not that anyone needed a reminder. Charias explained it to you yesterday. It all started in the Chersonese, he said. That little peninsula at the entrance from the Aegean Sea to the Hellespont, through which ships from the Black Sea bring our city all-important grain. We Athenians, he said, have been active there for generations, and one of our generals, Diopathes, has been tasked with setting up a clericy there, a special colony of Athenian citizens. But here's the problem. In recent years, that annoying king of Macedon, Philip, has been meddling in the Chersonese. He's made some of the cities his allies. And the best ally for him is the city of Cardia, right next to our new cleric colony. Things have gotten messy, Charias told you. Our settlers, perhaps, might have encroached on Cardian land, and the Cardians, well, they didn't take kindly to that. They got that Macedonian king to send troops, and our settlers had to back off. That's fine, you guess, but our general Diopathes, he went too far. He sent his ships west and raided parts of coastal Thrace, which the King Philip controls. The Macedonian king was busy at the time, attacking some deeper inland parts of Thrace, some of the Betoi or the Odrysians or something. Now King Philip has sent envoys demanding our general Diopathes be recalled back to Athens to be tried for his crimes. And look, you're not a fan of King Philip. The Macedonians are the enemy, barbarians, the lot of them, from a backwater kingdom where you can't even buy a decent slave. But we are in the wrong here, you think. Diopathes shouldn't have attacked like that, even if he needed the supplies. It makes us look bad. That's your take, and Charias agrees. So you have paid extra attention today. You've listened as the usual aristocrats, the best politicians of the city, gave their opinion on the current issue, some in favor of recalling the general, some in favor of sticking it to the Macedonians. It's all the usual suspects. The Macedonian sympathizers wax lyrical about justice, and one of the general's sympathizers mentions his baby son, Menander, how sad it would be if his father were disgraced. Who cares? You've been waiting this whole time for one man alone, one man who you know you'll disagree with, the most important orator in the city, the Macedonians' greatest enemy. The herald climbs up onto the bema, the speaker's stage, and announces the next orator to give his opinion. Demosthenes. The familiar silhouette stands and climbs the stage, past the citizens straightening their posture and craning their heads. You can barely make out the orator's usual traits, his frail, thin body already straining just to get up the bema. This guy has never been a proper soldier, a warrior like you were once. Yet here he is, about to argue, you bet, for another war with King Philip, for resistance to Macedonian hegemony. You remember, just a few years ago, he supported the peace treaty, that so-called Peace of Philocrates. You were there. You voted for it. But now, he and everyone like him pretends that they had never supported the peace. It was a bad deal, a horrible idea. Like you'll ever believe him. The pre-speech blabbering quiets to a murmur, and the orator speaks. It should be the duty of all speakers, men of Athens, to give no expression to their hatred or their partiality, but to put forward just what each thinks the best counsel, especially when you are debating a question of urgent public importance. But since there are speakers who are impelled to address you, either as partisans or from some other motive, whatever it may be, you citizens who form the majority ought to dismiss all else from your minds, to vote and act in such a way as you think will best serve our city. You whisper, leaning against Charias. We sure will, I promise. You see his smirk flash under his curly beard, his light chuckle like a song for you, his lips. Don't get distracted, you think. Demosthenes is blabbing on about Philip. Diopathes is a waste of time, he's saying. Whether or not he did wrong, Philip is the enemy. And yeah, sure, he's right about that, but we have peace with Philip. Why would we break it? But Demosthenes answers your question as if listening to your own thoughts. Go up to the Acropolis, he's saying. Look at the terms of the peace yourself carved on stone. King Philip already broke the peace, long before Diopathes ever set sail. He says, what do they mean by saying that we must either make war or keep peace? For we have no choice in the matter, but there remains the most righteous and most necessary task of all, which these gentlemen deliberately pass over in silence. What, then, is that task? To defend ourselves against the aggressor. You've seen the stone stele. You and Charias went and read those terms one day when you had nothing better to do. Tragically, Demosthenes is right. But who cares? Even if Philip has broken aspects of the peace, our general Diopathes is still in the wrong. He still needs to be punished. But Demosthenes has an answer for that. Even if Diopathes was in the wrong, and clearly he isn't, what use is it to recall him? He says, "For suppose someone should ask Philip, 'Tell me, which would you prefer? That the troops now serving with Diopathes, whatever their character may be, for I am not discussing that, should prosper and win credit at Athens and grow in number with the cooperation of the government, or that a few accusers and detractors should cause them to be broken up and destroyed?' I think Philip would choose the latter." But Diopathes still raided the king's lands, you're thinking. Not to mention the Greek cities across the strait in Asia. Aren't we supposed to protect the freedom of the Greeks? Demosthenes raises his voice, breaking your train of thought. "Now, some of you ought to be told the possible result of all this. I shall speak freely, for indeed I could not speak otherwise. All the generals that have ever set sail from your land, if I'm wrong, I submit myself to any penalty. They all raise money from the Chians, from the Erythraeans, from whatever people they can. I mean, of the Greeks of Asia Minor." Okay, that's true. How else would they get supplies? You know, the Athenians can't send the whole treasury just to the Hellespont. And so too in this case. While Diopathes has a force with him, it is perfectly plain that all these people will pay up. For where else do you suppose that he looks for the maintenance of his troops if he gets nothing from you and has no private fortune to furnish their pay? To the sky? No, indeed. It is from what he can collect or beg or borrow that he keeps things going. You chuckle involuntarily. Charias gives you a look, shoving your shoulder nub, but then he's back to his usual intense focus. 'Cause now Demosthenes is speaking your language. Diopathes made us look bad, you've been thinking, but the orator is saying, what would the other Greeks think? "For tell me, by Zeus, if the Greeks should call you to account for the opportunities that your carelessness has already thrown away, and should question you thus, 'Men of Athens, do you send us embassies on every occasion to explain how Philip is plotting against us and all the other Greeks, and how we must be on our guard against that man, and all that sort of thing?' Well, yeah, you think that's exactly what we've been doing. And yet, you most futile of mortals, when that man has been out of sight for 10 months, cut off from all chance of returning home by disease, by winter, and by war, have you neither liberated Euboea nor regained any of your lost possessions?" At the word Euboea, you feel suddenly a burning, shooting pain on your right side. You straighten up as best you can, cool morning air rushing in the space between you and Charias. On instinct, Charias shoots out his arm to catch you, to keep you from falling over. But just as quickly, he jolts back, aware of the gaze of the Athenian citizens behind you. Demosthenes continues. "On the other hand, while you stay at home, at leisure and in health, if indeed they could say that men who behave thus are in health, Philip has set up 2 despots in Euboea, entrenching one right over against Attica and the other as a menace to Skiathos. But you never cleared away these obstacles, even if you had no further ambitions, And have you tamely submitted? Euboea, that long island just north, just off the mainland. Euboea, Euboea. And with your left hand, you grab at the pane, trying to pinpoint it, to find it, but you only hit air. Why don't you go back to Euboea? Part of you is always there, will always be there, literally. Your right arm, all the way past your elbow, is still in Euboea. It's been there for years near the battlefield at Tamani. I did my part, you think. You helped free Euboea. It's not your fault the tyrants there defected to the king. And what did you get for it? 2 obols a day as pension for your disability? A few more for attending every judicial case you can? A couple more for every meeting at the ecclesia? You wish you could work your old farm, that little plot in the fertile center of Attica. But now, you remember, that sacrifice means nothing, all because of King Philip. Demosthenes is saying, what then is the reason, men of Athens, why these speakers never admit that Philip is provoking war when he is thus openly conducting campaigns, violating rights, subduing cities, but when others urge you not to give way to Philip nor submit to these losses, they accuse them of trying to provoke war? I will explain. It is because they want the natural anger that you would feel at any sufferings in the war to be diverted against your wisest counselors, so that you may bring them to trial instead of punishing Philip, and that they may themselves be the accusers instead of paying the penalty for their present wrongdoings. Anger, a feeling you're familiar with, the burning pain of your phantom limb. Demosthenes is saying that no other Greek city would allow Macedonian sympathizers. He says, but at Athens, though Philip has not only robbed you of Amphipolis and the Cardian territory, but is also turning Euboea into a fortress to overawe you, and is even now on his way to attack Byzantium, it is safe to speak on Philip's behalf. Indeed, of these politicians, some who were beggars are suddenly growing rich. Some unknown to name and fame are now men of honor and distinction, while you, on the contrary, have passed from honor to dishonor, from affluence to destitution. For a city's wealth I hold to be allies, credit, goodwill, and of all these you are destitute. You feel Charias brush against you, supporting you. But you are focused as Demosthenes continues, presenting argument after argument. I say that we must pay our contributions and keep together the force now in the field, rectifying whatever seems to be amiss, but not disbanding the whole for any adverse criticism. We must send ambassadors in every direction to instruct, to exhort, to act. Charias's body is tense as a ship's ropes under strain of a storm. We'll go to war if he has his way, he whispers. We sure will, you whisper, more to yourself. When the time comes for the vote, you barely think. You raise your left hand. Everyone else in favor raises their right, but the herald counts it all the same. And you ignore Charias's open mouth, his face pale as a Thracian slave, his arms crossed, his eyes, those light barley brown eyes, staring at your raised hand. You and Charias are silent all the way down the massive steps from the Pnyx, the assembly hill. all the way down the wide road to the Agora, the central market square crowded with honorary statues and stelae, crowded with merchants eager to sell wine and snacks and daily bread to the returning citizens, crowded with heralds proclaiming the vote. The Athenians will keep the general Diopathes at the Hellespont and resist Macedonian aggression. You can barely hear over the commotion as Charias says, "Why?" You ignore him, your cheeks burning, your head low. You book it to the merchants. You pop out from your mouth the trioble you received, like every other citizen, for attending the assembly. You rub the spit-soaked trioble clean on your tunic, making Athena's face and the owl on the opposite side all shiny. You had a purse once, but that wore away years ago. Besides, you never have more than a few obols at a time, and no thief would ever reach into your mouth. Everyone like you does it this way. Usual? The merchant asks. He gives you an obol as change with your flatbread, couple olives, and some cheese. Charias does the same. You sit on the retaining wall of the South Stoa, snacking, but Charias hasn't taken a bite. "Why?" he asks. You take another bite. Yummy. "Antiphanes, why? You promised." You stop chewing. You simply lift the bread in your hand. Charias stares at it. He knows the grain that made this bread came from the north, from the Black Sea, through the Hellespont, past the Chersonese. He scoffs. "Don't you remember what Aeschines said?" Aeschines, the greatest orator of Athens, in your opinion, the great rival of Demosthenes. You've always been more of an Aeschines guy. After all, he was there too on the campaign that took your arm. He fought alongside you, and when your comrades won, he was the first to ride home and bring the good news. "Of course I remember," you say. Aeschines argued as you expect him to, the opposite of his rival. His opinion was what drove your own initially, that Diopathes should be punished, that we should preserve the peace. Now you see, there wasn't any peace to begin with. "So what?" Charias asks. "We just go to war then?" "We," he said, as if you could ever hold a spear again. You cough. "Demosthenes was persuasive, I guess." "And what about me? You might be fine here, but don't you realize what this means? My sister isn't even married. My father's getting old. What am I to do?" A cold hand seems to grip your heart. "You don't even think about going." "I won't have a choice," Charias says. "You must have realized. Or were you too caught up in the past? We aren't boys anymore, Antiphanes." You shrivel. Boys. What you both are to each other was appropriate then, a fling, experimenting, part of adolescence. But now, as two full-bearded men, full-fledged citizens, now there's good reason why you meet up at dead of night in the shadows of the long walls or the privacy of sacred groves. Charias sees your expression. That's not what I meant. It's just... You remember, you whisper, what Aeschines said 2 years ago? Of course, Charias remembers. It was another spat between the two politicians, a big one, when Aeschines revealed that Demosthenes had kept a male lover in his house. You remember how, in that moment, Charias squeezed up against your shoulder. only for Aeschines to clarify the lover was a pais, a boy, a regular pederastic relationship between an older man and a youth, like any other among the Athenians. Charias, I'll do what I need to do, you say. I'll take care of Aristolaia and your dad too. I'll work as a herald if I need to. Charias shakes his head. No, you love the juries. You don't have to work. I will, you say. If you just promise me you'll come back. And right there, in broad daylight, Charias touches your wrist. His barley brown eyes lock with yours the way they do before moving closer. And he says, I'll fight Demosthenes' war, and I'll come back. I promise. Welcome again, friends, to Alexandria, a Hellenistic World podcast. You just heard the expert oration of Demosthenes, one of the greatest Greek orators of all time. Our friend, the veteran Antiphanes, was begrudgingly convinced by the expert orator, much to the chagrin of his partner, Charias. Antiphanes, as you learned, was injured in an Athenian campaign to free Euboea, that long island just to their north from the Macedonian King Philip's influence. That campaign, in approximately 349 BCE, temporarily succeeded, but by our time in 341, Euboea was just one of many battlegrounds lost by the Athenians to the encroaching Macedonian menace. For almost 2 decades, King Philip had steadily conquered more and more Greek cities, starting with the former Athenian colony of Amphipolis back in 357. The political elite of Athens were divided on what exactly to do about King Philip. On the one hand, you had politicians like Aeschines, considered one of the 10 greatest orators of ancient Greece, along with Demosthenes. Aeschines advocated, in short, for appeasement. He felt strongly that resistance against the King Philip would only result in disaster. Of course, this led his opponents to accuse him of taking numerous bribes from King Philip. Chief among his accusers was the one and only Demosthenes. Back in 343, as recalled by our friend Antiphanes, the 2 great orators came to a head in dueling speeches, both titled On the False Embassy. Now, we don't have time to dissect all the intricacies of this argument, but the chief charge brought against Aeschines was bribery by the Macedonians. These speeches were both just fantastic. Maybe I'll do a bonus B-side for them one day. But in the end, Aeschines barely managed to acquit himself by just 30 votes out of a total 1,501 jurymen. By our current date, 341, Aeschines and Demosthenes were both major players, titans of their age. But Demosthenes was not always so gifted. Let's go back, then, over 40 years prior. Demosthenes, son of Demosthenes, was born in 384 BCE to a rich family. His father, Demosthenes Sr., was a wealthy owner of the time of a lavish family home, various loans and bank deposits, and 2 outright factories. One workshop making swords and knives composed of 32 highly skilled slaves, and another workshop of 20 slaves devoted solely to crafting cabinets. The problem was that Demosthenes Sr. died when his son was only 7 years old, leaving his vast estate in the hands of his son's legal guardians. For over a decade, those guardians abused and misused the estate, so that by the time Demosthenes Jr. reached maturity, his inheritance had been drastically reduced. So Demosthenes did what any good Athenian citizen should do. He sued the crap out of him. But the young Demosthenes had a hard battle ahead of him, because Athenian law courts weren't like our modern ones. In Athens, there were no lawyers. The litigant had to deliver his own speech himself, both as prosecution or defendant. And Demosthenes wasn't exactly a good orator at just 18 years old. Actually, it was the opposite. Growing up, Demosthenes probably had a speech impairment, pronouncing his R's as L's. So from Corinth to Colinth, or from Bataros to Batalos. The story goes that he overcame this impediment by training himself to speak with a pebble in his mouth. And the young Demosthenes trained hard. Much later, the historian and philosopher Plutarch uses Demosthenes as his quintessential proof that anyone can overcome complete lack of talent with extreme hard work. But Demosthenes wasn't alone. His mentor was Isaios, a famous orator in his own right. Reportedly, though, Isaios was Demosthenes' second choice. His first choice would have been Isaios' own teacher, Isocrates, the best orator of the previous generation. But Isocrates apparently charged too much. Demosthenes couldn't afford him, so he contented himself with Isaios. And Isaios did a great job. At the age of 20, Demosthenes took the stage and sued his former guardians, and he won. The courts forced his guardians to pay up, although Demosthenes never quite got everything he was owed. But now, Demosthenes was an expert in rhetoric and oratory, and he decided to make speech writing his career. You see, in Athens, you have to deliver your own speech in court, but you don't have to write it. So, for the next decade, Demosthenes worked as a logographer, a speechwriter, for private legal suits, all the while perfecting his craft. Then, at the age of 30, he entered the political arena. He had a rocky start. Plutarch reports he was basically booed out of the assembly more than once because his style was old-fashioned, his sentences were long and formal. And that was the case, Plutarch says, until he figured out what was missing from his oratory: delivery and enunciation. And here, I should briefly mention one of the most famous later admirers of Demosthenes, the Roman orator Cicero, who lived 300 years later in the 1st century BCE. Cicero was so enamored by Demosthenes, and toward my point about enunciation, Cicero reports that Demosthenes, when asked what the 3 most important skills for an orator were, answered, first, delivery, second, delivery, and third, delivery. Anyway, with that figured out, Demosthenes delivered himself up to the top ranks of great statesmen of his day. Over the course of the late 350s, and especially the 340s, Demosthenes really came into his own as an almost one-issue politician. All he cared about, all the speeches where he shined the brightest, was Philip of Macedon. Demosthenes, more than anyone, saw the existential threat that King Philip posed to the freedom of the Greek polis, the city-states. So, in 351 BCE, he delivered his so-called First Philippic, his first major speech advocating direct opposition against Philip. A couple years later, Demosthenes delivered his 3 Olympiacs, calling on Athens to defend the Greek polis of Olynthus, which was under attack by the king. In that case, he was unsuccessful. The Athenians instead sent the expedition to Euboea, where our friend Antiphanes lost his arm, and meanwhile, King Philip completely destroyed Olynthos, killing and enslaving all of its inhabitants. Whoops. Well, Olynthos was lost, and King Philip is occupying much of northern Greece, so Athens had to make peace. They sent an embassy, and the result was the Peace of Philocrates in 346 BCE. For about 5 years, that peace held. King Philip occupied himself with wars in Thrace, and Athens was busy persuading as many allies as possible, gathering a coalition to eventually resist Philip when the time was right. But of course, the Athenians were also busy doing what they do best, fighting amongst themselves, such as that debate I mentioned earlier between Demosthenes and his rival Aeschines over whether the peace was a good idea. It wasn't, they agree. Who supported the peace? They both did, but they both deny it. And what they should do now. Which brings us back to 341 BCE. Demosthenes has persuaded the Athenians to resist Philip and keep the general Diopathes in the Chersonese. What now? War is basically inevitable. A few months after his speech on the Chersonese, Demosthenes delivered perhaps his most famous political speech, his third Philippic, where he gave a solid plan to revamp the state's finances, building more ships and gathering more troops, and most of all, unite all the Greek poleis into one coalition, not unlike their ancestors' resistance against the Persian invasions over 100 years earlier. The third Philippic, more than any other speech, solidified Demosthenes' control over Athens. For 2 years, he wasn't just one of the great politicians, he was the de facto leader of all the Athenians. By 339 BCE, things had come to a head. Demosthenes was sent as ambassador to Thebes, probably the second most powerful Greek polis of the time. There, great orator as he was, he debated against King Philip's envoys and persuaded Thebes to join the Greek alliance. And just in time, Philip was besieging Byzantium, the most important city on the Bosporus, the gate to the Black Sea's all-important grain. King Philip was forced to abandon the siege and wheel around, racing back to Greece. As we heard in a previous episode, after a few small battles here and there, the army of King Philip finally met the Athenians, Thebans, and their allies near Chaeronea, a small city in Boeotia. Everyone was at that battle. We heard our friend the Herald's account from the Macedonian side, with King Philip leading the right flank and his son, the Prince Alexander, crushing the Theban sacred band on the left. The Athenians, initially successful against King Philip's side, were led by two generals named Chares and Lysicles. But Demosthenes, the great orator himself, was also in the fighting among the hoplites, the heavy infantry. Well, we know how that turned out. Demosthenes was no soldier, and when King Philip turned the tide, Demosthenes was one of many Athenian soldiers that fled unscathed, which makes the next choice by the Athenians very interesting. Back at Athens, Demosthenes was elected to give the funeral oration over at the mass burial. This was a massive honor, but usually one given after a victory or in the midst of war, like Pericles' famous funeral oration back in the Peloponnesian War. But Chaeronea was no victory, and not all Athenians were as lucky as Demosthenes. So let's return to our friend Antiphanes. It's 338 BCE, and you are standing just outside the double gate. Statues and monuments tower on all sides around you, the domain of the most honored dead, the Demosthenes, the public cemetery for the greatest warriors of Athens. You face the walls of your city, a mess of new repairs and preparations atop them. Only the Acropolis peaks above that mess on the walls, the temple of the city's goddess casting a dark, wide shadow eastward. But the temple is bereft today of visitors. The workers repairing the walls have stopped because you, like everyone else, showed up that morning to the agora, where you and your love had shared so many meals, so many conversations. But you only found there Aristolaia, his sister, and his father Epiteles. You three and everyone else trudged north from the agora, past the sunward edge of the Acropolis and out the double gate. The whole time, you and Aristolaia kept the old man standing, hobbling forward. And now, finally, you're here. You and everyone else, the mothers, the fathers, the sons, the medics. At the foot of the walls of Athens, there is a high platform of timber, probably Macedonian timber, you think. And atop that wood platform stands one man alone. Demosthenes clears his throat. He looks even weaker than before, gaunt and thin like a dragonfly, like the slightest wind would send him careening away. The orator closes his eyes and gathers himself. He plants his 2 feet solid on the wood, and when he speaks, his voice is still strong. After the state decreed that those who repose in this tomb, having acquitted themselves as brave men in the war, should have a state funeral, and appointed me to the duty of delivering over them a customary speech, I began straightway to study how they might receive their due tribute of praise. But as I studied and searched my mind, the conclusion forced itself upon me that to speak as these dead deserve was one of those things that cannot be done. Can't be done by you, you think. You'll never understand why the Boule proposed Demosthenes, of all people, to give this speech. How could they? He was the reason all of this happened. He was the reason the Athenians went to war. He is the reason that Charias is gone. Yes, you voted for his proposal. And yes, when they proposed to give him the honor, you voted for that too. But that's because you want him to have to face what he's done. So now he's up there on that high wood platform, speaking in humiliation to the very families whose fathers and sons he killed. And now it's turning out just as you thought. This speech, it's the worst speech he's ever made. It's so basic. The same tired tropes as every other funeral oration. He's droning on about the original Athenians, your autochthonous ancestors born from Attic mud, indigenous. Oh, our ancestors did such great things. Oh, remember when we beat the Persian invasions? Wasn't that better, he's saying, even better than the Greeks at Troy, who took 10 whole years just for one city, whereas our Athenian ancestors beat back a whole continent twice. Whatever, you think. Charias didn't care about that. You don't care about that. You only cared about him. Demosthenes finally gets to it. Now, to resume my theme. Though many deeds of these men are at hand, because of which they will be justly eulogized, I am at a loss what to mention first when I come face to face with the facts. For thronging into my mind as they do, all at one and the same time, it becomes difficult to make a choice among them. I shall endeavor, however, to maintain the same order of topics in my speech as marked the course of the lives of these men. Oh, come on, you think. He's blabbing about their excellent education, their innate nobility, their courage in sacrificing their lives, as if Charias was some sort of aristocrat seeking nothing but glory. And now, the excuses. Of necessity, it happens, when a battle takes place, that the one side is beaten and the other is victorious. But I should not hesitate to assert that in my judgment, the men who die at the post of duty on either side do not share the defeat, but are both alike victors. For the mastery among the survivors is decided as the deity disposes. For that which each was in duty bound to contribute to this end, every man who has kept his post in battle has done. But if, as a mortal being, he meets his doom, what he has suffered is an incident caused by chance, but in spirit he remains unconquered by his opponents. You want to scream. How, Demosthenes? How can you, of all people, say that? Chance? Chance? What happened to Charias wasn't chance. Charias died holding the line. You know it. His corpse, his corpse, his body, the chest that gave you such warmth, was stabbed, mangled from the front. Only his barley brown eyes were recognizable. What wounds does Demosthenes have? None. He didn't fight. Demosthenes ran. Furthermore, Demosthenes is saying, excuses, in contests of which the deity, the master of all, has disposed the outcome as it chose, it is necessary, of course, to acquit all others, being but human, of the charge of showing weakness. And where victory was won because the leader of our opponents prevailed over those appointed to the command of our army, no one could justly locate the cause in the rank and file, either of the enemy or ourselves. But if, after all, there is any human being who might rightly lay a charge concerning the issue of that battle, he would with good reason advance it against those of the Thebans who were appointed to this command. Nor could anyone rightly lay blame upon the rank and file, either of the Thebans or ourselves. Of course, it's the Theban commanders, you think. Not our own commanders. Not you, Demosthenes, in the rank and file. He's pandering now. He goes through each of the 10 Athenian tribes, giving some stupid reason why the war dead from each tribe fought so hard. He says that your tribe, the Oineidae, had some ancient connection to Thebes, so of course they fought hard for both cities. And the founder of Charias's tribe, the Cecropidae, was half human, half dragon, so they must have fought with the strength of a dragon. You know Charias fought with the strength of his own 2 arms, those arms that used to hold you, now both chopped to pieces, lying somewhere in the fields by Chaeronea. You're so caught up in your own thoughts, your own seething emptiness, you don't notice the sobs and wails growing louder around you. You don't notice the old man Epiteles shaking as if possessed by some nymph or daimon. You come back to yourself and grip the old man tighter, keeping him steady. Aristolaia does the same. Demosthenes is giving uninspired comforts. It is a grievous thing for fathers and mothers to be deprived of their children, and in their old age to lack the care of those who are nearest and dearest to them. Epitales wails, a piercing scream that leaves your left ear ringing. He struggles out of your grip, and now the old man is on hard ground, clutching pebbles. He's one of many. Demosthenes ignores all the wailing. Yes, but it is a proud privilege to behold them possessors of deathless honors and a memorial of their valor erected by the state and deemed deserving of sacrifices and games for all future time. You see that Demosthenes still has his grip on them because Epitales stops his wailing and sits limp on the hard ground. Demosthenes says, "And of this pain we shall find the deity to be the cause, to whom mortal creatures must yield. But of the glory and honor, the source is found in the choice of those who willed to die nobly." You think, but it wasn't his choice. It was mine. He voted against the war. He voted to appease. But here you are. Demosthenes finishes weak, bidding everyone to disperse to their homes. Aristolaia gives you a nod, and together you help her father get up. She gives you a look, the same look she's given you since you were kids. Get it together, Antiphanes. Back then, it was a scolding look, disapproving your bad influence over her brother. But now, there's something else, those same barley brown eyes shining in the sunset with recognition. You had told Charias, "I'll take care of Aristolaia, and your dad too." Of course, you had planned to take care of them until he came back. But Charias isn't coming back. So you'll support them. You will do anything you can. Through your work, Charias will live. You promised. Thank you for listening to Alexandria, a Hellenistic World podcast. I'm always open to feedback or suggestions, so please leave a rating or review on your podcast app of choice. If you want to support the podcast, we have a Patreon. The link to that is in the description. If you want to talk directly, you can find me on Twitter at Alexandria_pod, on Instagram as Alexandria.pod, or on Blue Sky and YouTube as simply Alexandria Pod. You can find bibliography, more contact info, and other goodies on my website, alexandriapod.wordpress.com. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you in Alexandria.